Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're delighted to have you all with us tonight. It is an honor to welcome you to the Arab film series online, 7 by 7, 7 artists, 7 years. Tonight marks the 7th year of the war in Yemen, a date commemorated with a special screening of short films by 7 Yemeni filmmakers. My name is Claire Nettleton, and I am the academic curator of the Benton Museum of Art at Pomona College, which features the groundbreaking and pertinent exhibition Alia Ali, Project Series 53, curated by Senior Curator Rebecca McGrew with Independent Curator Hannah Grossman. To learn more, please view Alia's incredible catalog or visit the Benton's website, which we'll put in the chat. We would like to thank Alia and our partners from the Arab American National Museum, the Arab Film and Media Institute, ArteEast, everyone at the Benton Museum of Art at Pomona College, the Pomona College Department of Art History, Youth of the World Together, and all of the contributing filmmakers for their inspiration and tireless efforts in creating this program. Noor Tamari, Pomona College class of 22, an intern at the Benton, will now join me in welcoming you.
Thank you, Claire. مرحبا بالجميع. مساء الخير وشكرا لكم جميعا على حضوركم معنا. اسمي نور ثماري وأنا طالبة في كلية بومونا وأعمل أيضا في متحف البنتن للفنون في كلية بومونا. إنه شرف كبير أن نرحب بكم في سلسلة الأفلام العربية 7 في 7 7 فنانين 7 سنوات. تصادف هذه الليلة السنة السابعة من الحرب في اليمن، ونتذكر هذا اليوم بعرض خاص لأفلام قصيرة ل7 صانعي أفلام يمنيين. قبل أن نبدأ، أود أن أشكر الفنانة المبدعة عالية علي على عملها وجهدها، وأيضا كل شركائنا من المتحف العربي الأمريكي الوطني، معهد الفيلم والإعلام العربي ArteEast، متحف البنتن للفنون في كلية بومونا، قسم تاريخ الفن لكلية بومونا، منظمة شباب العالم معا، وطبعا جميع صانعي الأفلام المشتركين على عملهم الشاق وجهدهم في إنشاء هذا البرنامج. نتمنى لكم الاستمتاع. شكرا.
Thank you so much, Noor. So before we begin tonight's program, we would like to offer the following acknowledgement. The Benton Museum of Art at Pomona College in Claremont acknowledges that our buildings and our programs occupy unceded Indigenous land. We recognize the Tongva people as the traditional land caretakers of Tuvangar, the Tongva world. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work with and for the Indigenous peoples of this region, and to those whose ancestors and relations represent our collections, which reflect the creative expression of over 100 Native American cultures. We express gratitude for all of those who've cared for the land we call home, and we pay respect to ancestors, elders, and relations, past, present, and emerging. We welcome continued collaboration and guidance as we work to realize the spirit of these words more deeply and more completely. It is now my distinct pleasure to welcome Dave Serio, film curator, educator, and programming specialist of the Arab American National Museum, who will be moderating tonight to offer an acknowledgement as well.
Thank you so much, Claire. The Arab American National Museum sits on Anishinaabe land and is located in the region with the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the nation. We also acknowledge our neighboring city, Detroit, as Anishinaabe territory and other Indigenous peoples' land, as well as being the largest majority Black city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic contributions. Together, we uplift the larger ethnic and racial fabric of the Metro Detroit community. I am now pleased to welcome our special guest, artist Alia Ali, to offer an acknowledgement.
Hello, assalamu alaikum to all of you. It's an honor to be here and thank you for being here. I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Mescalero Apache, where I am today in Roswell, New Mexico. They have ties and stories on this land. I think it's important to acknowledge the land because growing up as an immigrant here, I never heard the traditional names of the territories. Indigenous people were talked about in the past tense, and all the struggles they faced were in the past tense as well. It's easier to deny Indigenous people their rights if we historicize their struggles and simply pretend they don't exist. I'm grateful to be able to work here and have the opportunity to hopefully continue to build relationships, expand dialogues, and engage in communities on this territory. As an artist and an activist, I would like to take this opportunity to commit myself to the struggle against the systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous people of their lands and denied their rights to self-determination. Thank you, and I'm going to pass it on to Dave.
Thank you so much, Alia. Ahlan wa sahlan, hello again. Assalamu alaikum. And welcome to tonight's program, which again is a collaborative effort that is presented by the Arab American National Museum, the Arab Film and Media Institute, ArteEast, the Benton Museum of Art at Pomona College, the Department of Art History at Pomona College, and Youth of the World Together. It was said before, but it's certainly worth repeating again. My name is Dave Serio. I'm an educator and curator of the Arab Film Festival at the first and only institution dedicated to telling the history, culture, and contributions of Arab Americans, the Arab American National Museum, which is based in Dearborn, Michigan. Thank you all again so much for joining us for tonight's beautiful program. This is a program that, and I feel like I can safely speak for all of the partners, a program that we're all very passionate about, and hopefully this is one of many future programs to come. As Claire mentioned, today marks the 7th year of the war in Yemen, where currently the largest humanitarian crisis in the world continues to unfold. According to many human rights organizations, approximately 80% of the population in Yemen, including over 12 million children, is reliant on humanitarian services. Over 2.3 million children under the age of 5 are projected to face acute malnutrition. This program is about highlighting the voices, perspectives, and perseverance of the Yemeni community, both in Yemen and in her diaspora, and throughout her diaspora. Tonight's program, 7 by 7, 7 artists, 7 years, is a treasured collection of short films by 7 Yemeni filmmakers that collectively push back against binary portrayals of Yemenis as victims, providing an expansive view on how Yemenis present themselves on their terms. We are honored to be a part of this amazing program and we continually try to strive to support and uplift the Yemeni community in all possible aspects. We also feel that that film is one of the best tools that we have as individuals to connect communities and people together, and it's one of the best ways that we can support Arab and Arab diasporic artists. Tonight we are in for a wonderful treat. We are pleased to present the public premiere of Alia Ali's works, Conflict is More Profitable Than Peace, and Mahjar. The film's total runtime is approximately 31 minutes. Immediately following the screening will be a dialogue with Alia Ali and myself. During our conversation, the chat will be enabled so guests may ask any questions, and we'll try to do the best we can and answer as many as possible. We are also pleased to showcase 6 additional films by 6 amazing and talented filmmakers. Following tonight's live program, these additional 6 films will be available to stream for 48 hours. We are grateful to have the following films, which are works in progress, available to the public. The films are Karoom by Neshwan Sadeq, Arzayzah by Alaa Hafed, Made of Gold by Saber Wasel, The Last Resort by Noor Adeen Morgan, Scene 2 by Abdulrahman Alward, and The Helmet by Osama Khaled. So I really recommend that you check out these films when they become available right after tonight's live program. Now, on to tonight's program. I am pleased to introduce both of Alia Ali's amazing films, the first one being Conflict is More Profitable Than Peace, which is a photographed binder translated into time-based media documenting the ongoing war in Yemen. It attempts to unravel the intricate web of facts and players that have generated the complicated state of affairs from which one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time has emerged. By naming both victims and culprits, the research presents a less distracted image of who, while still pursuing the question of why. Rather than redacting the highlighted research, rather than redacting, the highlighted research manifests into an evidentiary mapping, drawing attention to those who hide behind Black ink and thus revealing a different panorama as a testimony to the mounting evidence of war crimes. And the second film we'll be viewing tonight is Mahjar. As children, Alia states, we were told of Al-Najm, Al-Ahmar, or the Red Star, which was gifted to Balqis, our ruler, the Queen of Sheba. Al-Najm Al-Ahmar, or the Red Star, negates placelessness and alienation as generations into the future are built into this myth. This thread ties together Sabians and their descendants, for when we gaze at the stars, we are connected by the Red Star. It was visible then as it is now. In 1997, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, sent the Sojourner Pathfinder to explore Mars. 3 Yemenis, Adam Ismail, Mustafa Khalil, and Abdullah Al-Umari, filed a lawsuit against NASA for invading the land that they inherited 3,000 years ago. Suddenly, Mars became a point of reference and a rupture in the dystopic existence in which we reflect ourselves. Under the current circumstances of ongoing trauma, Yemeni citizens and their diaspora can no longer imagine an existence on a horizontal axis, and therefore we must activate vertical ones as well. Lastly, we are sending lots of love and support to the Asian American community in Atlanta after the recent appalling and horrific attack. We stand with the Asian American Pacific Islander community against this attack and all forms of xenophobia, oppression, and white supremacist attacks. Now, without further ado, please enjoy the program, and we'll see you on the other side for our talkback. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's program and for sticking around for our talkback with Alia Ali. Before I introduce Alia, I'm always curious how folks feel after they see like a film or engage in a visual program. So while I introduce Alia, would everybody mind maybe just dropping a one-word comment how they're feeling right now, how they're feeling after they watch these two films? I think that could be kind of cool. And with that, I will introduce the one and only, my friend, amazing, talented artist, Alia Ali. Alia is a Yemeni, Bosnian, US multimedia artist. She grew up between Sana'a, Sarajevo, Istanbul, Michigan, and Indiana, and later lived in Wales, Ho Chi Minh City, New Orleans, Los Angeles, Marrakesh, and is now joining us from New Mexico, where she is in residence at the Roswell Artist in Residence. She works between photography, video, and installation, addressing the politicization of the body, histories of colonialization, imperialism, sexism, and racism through projects that take pattern and textile as their primary motif. In her immersive installations, she utilizes light, pattern, and textile to move past language and offer an expansive experiential understanding of self, culture, and nation. She defines Yemeni Futurism as new explorations of Yemeni selfhood that are free from limitations of travel bans, borders, colonialism, trauma, and imposed linear timeframes. Calling upon Yemeni oral histories to conceptualize these narratives, she reflects on contemporary circumstances in Yemen and its diaspora. Drawing on stories including the nostalgic past of Queen Balqis of Saba, also known as the Queen of Sheba, Ali investigates dystopian realities of the present and radically imagined possibilities of the future. Alia, it's so wonderful to see you and so wonderful to be in conversation and so wonderful to have your beautiful work displayed. Thank you so much for creating these and taking time to join us today.
Thank you. It's such an honor, Dave. I mean, we're also close friends and we've worked on other things, but this was sort of a huge project. And so thank you also for all of the partners for giving the platform, especially on this day, on March 19th, which, it's been 6 years since the war has started. And so now this is marking the 7th year. So thank you.
My pleasure, of course. So I'm gonna put my professional hat on because I know we know each other. So usually it's fun to just catch up and chit chat and all that. So I'm gonna put my professional hat on and I really do. I really want to start the conversation off. Whenever somebody makes any type of art, I'm always interested to learn a little bit about the inspiration as to like where these stories and where these narratives come from. And I guess I should also say, and I apologize for doing this now, but I should also mention that folks, if you do have a question or something to add into the chat, please feel free. The chat is open, and we will again get to questions a little bit later on in our conversation. So sorry, Alia. So again, if you don't mind, just to repeat the question, can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind these stories and these narratives and these pieces that you've created?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for everybody who is joining us from actually different parts of the world. I saw in there, so that's really exciting. Yeah, so that as you just saw, the two films are actually really quite different. And I would say actually that the drive for each of them was also quite different. Conflict is more profitable than peace. I put it out in 2019 while I was an MFA student at CalArts in California. And I would say that probably what inspired it was rage. By that point, it was 4 years into the war. And there's this idea that especially people of the diaspora, I should say artists of the diaspora like myself, there's a sort of a responsibility that's sort of introduced. Sometimes it can be seen as a burden because we can't just make, I don't know, artwork about, let's say, landscape. We are, there is a sort of element, an integral element of using a platform and being able to bring out narratives that aren't being told or that are being shadowed by the media. And so, as you saw in the first film, it was really around Lahyan. I had just started my MFA, and the Lahyan massacre just infuriated me. And, I keep getting these questions, even till now, where people are kind of asking, explain to me about what the war is about Yemen. And it's so complex that I really wanted to do the labor of trying to extricate really what is happening. And, by looking through different media, finding that a lot of the things were actually censored, eventually going to Twitter and really seeing things from the perspective of Yemenis who were there. And it was horrific. And eventually, this became conflict is more profitable than peace. I ended up contacting two New York Times journalists and also a journalist, Nasser Rabi'i from Yemen, to try to compile the names of the victims from that massacre. And then those are the names that you hear throughout the film. And as you see, also being Arabs, we come from a generation where so much information was redacted. And so this one really subverts that and is highlighted. But at the end of making this, I should say this was a binder of 498 pages. I'm on my second binder at the moment, which I'm currently compiling in Roswell. But then I kind of came to a moment where I didn't really know where to go with it. I'm in a very privileged position, being in the United States, also have the blue passport, being able to move, but what do you do with it from there? And I was working with really some phenomenal artists at CalArts as my mentors, namely like Mercedes Dorame, Ashley Hunt, and Colleen Smith, who had actually introduced me to this notion of futurism. And really kind of pulling from Afrofuturism, but at the same time being very conscious not to take from the labor of what has created. It's also different traumas and different, of course, and different histories, which leads me to this idea of Arab futurism, which I'm actually really quite critical about, because it's this kind of notion really orientalizes. It's sort of an Orientalist concept in the sense because not all Arabs are the same. Even, the Middle East, we shouldn't use this word, it's kind of anchored in, it is a colonial term. And so looking at it not as an Arab futurism in which we're comparing, the traumas of the Iraqi people, of Syrians, of Palestinians, but really rooting it back to us, Yemen. And so this really gave birth to Mahjar. And Mahjar was really sourced for, I really wanted to focus while conflict was made really for non-Yemenis, because Yemenis follow these narratives. Mahjar was on the opposite. It was inspired by power rather than rage. It was a film made for Yemenis, And I think there's, yeah, it's very layered. So I'm going to stop there and then we can kind of dive into that more.
No, that sounds good. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of really excellent points. And I love that you are diving into futurism. I feel like futurism is a very non-diverse field. I feel like futurism for such a long time, at least, is dominated by non-communities of color. And it is nice to see, Arab futurism really starting to take shape, Yemeni futurism, Afro futurism, which has been around for a little bit. So it's nice to see the field starting to diversify a little bit, which I think is super necessary. Could you also talk a little bit about where this lives in terms of your exhibit as well that's at the Benton, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add to that. I mean, what's really interesting about the futurism is that there's actually so many communities. There's indigenous futurism, Sino-futurism, that are really using it as a capacity, as a space to kind of carve out, to carve out a space that is immediately contrasted, a counter future to what is basically imposed by external powers. So it is very empowering, I think. And there's a lot to learn from and a lot of sort of discussions that can happen within them, which I've been learning and finding really exciting. And I think in the ways that this film, Mahjar, so at the moment, I'm exhibiting this work at the Benton Museum. It was curated by senior curator Rebecca McGrew and independent curator Hannah Grossman. And it was really an incredible process because I was building it as I was finishing my MFA. And what was really important for me was also to create an experience. I'm also an installation artist. I'm not a filmmaker, although now video has become another material. I should say that this is also being exhibited in Roswell right now. And so the film, Mahjar, as you saw it right now in a single channel, it really exists similarly to the narrator, the main narrator of Mahjar, which is a spider. The spider is a time traveler, is a shapeshifter, moves from 3,000 years ago of being with Balqis to now, and even sort of there's like an index to her in conflict is more profitable than peace. So she essentially is weaving these documents and these lists and narratives and myths and science and language and, all into what these two compiled, like one being the film for others and one being the film for us. And so this can exist in installation as it does right now, as I mentioned with the Benton and at the Roswell Museum, but it also can exist in a single channel. And I think the most important in a way for me is actually that it has the capacity to reach people.
Oh, absolutely. And I love what you said about one film is, like you said, for maybe non-Yemeni audiences that might not know much of what's going on. And obviously there are multiple factors as to why that is the case. But then I love that you made Mahjar for the Yemeni audiences. And I feel like so often we're trying to be like, which is a good thing, right? It's good to include folks and it's good to shed light on situations and peoples and things like that. But at the same time, it's also nice to make a film for that audience as well. It doesn't always need to be, made for every single person, even though it kind of is, but like you have a specific goal in mind that Mahjar was for like the Yemeni audience. And I just really appreciated that, that kind of like that opposite, I guess, from conflict.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you're acknowledging that. And I think one of the things is that after I was making conflict, I'd realized there are so many incredible Yemeni artists. And a lot, again, going back to that notion of the burden and responsibility, these sort of circumstances that have been created by people who are not us. And yet we're sort of fragmented and our archives are fragmented. And I think about younger generations and even artists who I mentor and who I work with in terms of the fact of how do we reflect ourselves? Like, how do we, if we're thinking about the present as being so dystopic And we have such a nostalgia for the past, not only of when, let's say we were growing up, maybe 80s or in the 90s. I'm talking about the nostalgia that predates Islam and Judaism, like the Sabaean, the things that are rooted in us. That nostalgia, but thinking about that in time, what about the future? And as artists, we have this power and a capacity to create, to invent, and actually draw back together this fragmented archive. And so really conflict ended up being this appendix. It's sort of like, here, I did the labor, now it's up to you. There's no excuse for you to not know about what Yemen is about and what is happening. And now this is also a way so that we're no longer reflecting ourselves for children who have been brought up during the time of the war, basically, but to reflect ourselves in our power and beauty and not define our identity by our traumas and by war.
That's amazing. That's cause for like 1,000 snaps. Like thank you very much for sharing that. I want to get a little bit into, I'm always curious again, as somebody who is part of the programming aspect of like putting these programs on and kind of like more of the back end of stuff. What has been the response from like audiences? How have audiences responded to these video projects and some of the other art that you've been working on?
Yeah, well, I think it's really, that's an interesting question, because I think they're really varied responses. But I find that one, it certainly resonates. That my intention is really to have multiple entry points. And there are multiple entry points. People have different accessibility. I think about being a migrant, thinking about being of the diaspora, and what does it mean when you come to a country and you don't speak the language, and we're constantly reorienting ourselves around what is the dominant language or the dominant, culture, essentially. And at the same time, existing from where we come from, right? And carrying that with us. So these identities exist, and that's only two, sometimes it's three or four. And so through the film, I kind of use language as a way to create points of access. There are different languages that are featured. Of course, there's the visual, there's the soundscape, which throughout the film is actually also recorded sounds of Mars. Which sort of takes us there. I think that's also something that's experienced differently within the space or through, just like the computer screen, essentially. And then there's also an invented language. And rather, of course, there's Arabic and English, English is treated as a tertiary, as sort of the last, that's kind of pulled at the end. In which sort of everything might be drawn together for English speakers. But even before that, there's also an invented language, and we can get into that later. But I think when people, particularly of the diaspora or of marginalized communities, when they watch it, they sort of understand the idea that some of this is not for them. And I've had that comment a lot, and them being okay with it and being like, I feel it. And I understand that not all of this is for me, but I feel it, I understand it. It kind of evokes feeling and emotion. However, I have also been met with a lot of frustration where people really expect for everything to be translated and subtitled, and that information must be so accessible. And I think there's also a power in that choice and decision in saying, well, no, because it doesn't happen the other way around. Do I go and see everything in Arabic? No. And so it's introduced some interesting dialogues in regards to that. And I think it's really put specific audiences in a position where they don't have the privilege of having that accessibility.
Wonderful. No, thank you very much. Yeah, I think you make excellent points. And I know initially, because when I was watching Mahjar for the first time, by the way, both films, I love when I don't understand a film right off the bat, because it makes me think, it makes the film sit with me, and it makes me just like when I watched both of your films for the first time, I had so many conversations with myself, and I was like, okay, like there was just so much symbolism and power and things I didn't understand, especially in Mahjar. And I went through that. I was like, oh, that's weird. It's like, I feel weird that I can't grasp, I'm not grasping everything, or I can't understand everything. But then at the end, I remember thinking like, you know what, that's okay. I don't need to, like, you can get the big picture without having to like have everything served on a silver platter for you. So I think that's a really excellent point that you bring up.
Yeah, thanks. And I think also, I mean, in terms of that, I appreciate that you see that, and we don't really acknowledge that that the images are a language too. I'm the daughter of two linguists. So between them, they speak 7 languages, and they actually only share one, which is English. My mother's from Bosnia, my father's from Yemen. And so I grew up really seeing, I actually didn't even start speaking until I was 4.5 because I couldn't decide, and they sort of left me as mute. I clearly made up for it right now. But there's this idea of thinking about how language really, especially in terms of translation, and we see this and including image actually as well, how it's not only this tool to communicate, but is actually can be used as a weapon. And how really translation, or how language is used in media, can really be manipulated towards the agenda of whoever is sort of issuing that. And so, I mean, really, I became an artist in complete rejection, to reject that, because my intention was to go into law, and law is about the manipulation of language. It's not about justice. It's about who can do the better performance. So art, I think, has a lot more capacity and room without being presented as these truths, but, pathways for imagining, right? Alternate, experiences and perspectives, and raise these sort of questions of accessibility.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alia. I want to get into some of the other films that are being offered following this live event. For about 48 hours, folks are able to access films from 6 other amazing filmmakers. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about why these 6 films were selected as part of this series, and also like, well, we'll start there. Sorry, I don't want to give you like a multi question, but like, can you tell us a little bit about like the selection process behind these short films? Like, why these 6 shorts?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm really excited about this and I'm so thrilled that we're doing this. I've been sort of, especially since these projects started, I really wanted to start thinking about connecting this constellation of Yemenis, of the diaspora in different parts of the world. And 2 of the people that I met were Shema Al-Tamimi, and who introduced me later on to Nasr Al-Mang, who started Youth of the World Together. Nasr started it several years ago, which is this organization that actually promotes and supports young filmmakers from Yemen, particularly in terms of having a platform to create change, and particularly through art. And so I was invited to be a part of the jury, and I was blown away. So each of these films, there was a Karama Film Festival in January, and I was completely blown away. Each of these filmmakers, I should say that their films are still in progress. They were given $1,000 to create their films, and they are shorts. And they're these kind of beautiful snippets in terms of really providing a wider lens. I would almost say that it's a refracted lens. I think people might come to my work. In fact, I think that was a question earlier, and think, well, this is this is the only Yemeni perspective. But I want to remind people that I'm not in Yemen, and I haven't been in Yemen since 2009. And so from that, I really have a perspective from the diaspora and pulling them together. But these Yemenis actually made the film in Yemen with a very limited budget, but also really dangerous circumstances. So going through them, I introduced these films to yourself, to the different people from the Benton, ArteEast. And so collectively, we kind of decided, and there were particular ones that I felt really excited about all of them, but just to go through them, Katam, that's made by Neshwan Sadeq, I think, which starts it off, creates this really beautiful landscape. It presents the landscape of Taiz from the Central Highlands. We usually come to, I think, looking at Sana'a and the beautiful old houses that are thousands of years old. And really we come to this from these mountainous highlands and see the destruction, but also see people living and surviving and continuing to break bread together, and in this sort of constant fear, but at the same time in power. And this is not a story that we have, and he does it so beautifully. Following that is a really charming film by Alaa Hafed, who it's called Arzayzah, and it's kind of sort of a nickname to Aziza, who is an elder in one of the villages and from one of the tribes. And I think this film is really important because of really thinking about our ancestral knowledge, where we come from. You know, we come from an oral history that we've carried on, again, thousands of years of tales and myths and experiences through our grandparents. So our voices are carried on and not written. And I think this is something that we can all really relate to. And I thought that it was important having there. Made of Gold by Saber Wasel is also about heroes. You know, we're constantly being seen as sort of victims or villains. And in this regard, he really introduces a hero who's a football player. And even amidst a stadium that's broken down, we have these images, you know, and that's bombed and, but still, regardless of the architecture being, you know, destroyed by these external powers and occupiers, we still maintain our heroes and we respect them. And I think that was empowering. The Last Resort by Noor Adeen Morgan really was actually about his own experience. And it talks about accessibility in not only in terms of the blockade of food and resources, but also about getting opportunities. You know, we follow a character a gentleman who's going, you know, from, I believe it's Aden, has to go to Sey'un and Hadramaut, which is almost 2 days away, just to try to leave to get to an interview, a job interview. And I'll leave it at that. And it really talks about his trip, not even getting the interview, but just trying to get to the next port. Scene 2 and The Helmet are really kind of mind-blowing in the sense that they really, you know, scene 2 that's by Abdulrahman Alward is almost like it's like a play where these different characters from different parts of Yemen with different dialects, and one who's even a soldier and an elder, all find themselves in this, what we assume is a prison. And from that, this film is also very particularly made for Yemenis because it addresses certain violence, but it also brings people together and through assembly. As children, when we went to school, we all had this assembly where we would stand in line, and we would, you know, each class would go every week, and we would, or every day, and either do a little bit of the Quran and then a little bit of an Arabic grammar lesson and a little bit of English and a little bit of performance. And there's this reenactment that I think was really brilliant on his part because he was speaking directly to Yemenis. And finally is The Helmet by Osama Khaled, which is a sci-fi magic of a film where there's a tinkerer who Osama plays himself, and almost this, he, you know, escapes in his room within the old buildings of Yemen, ancient, I should say, and in a way carves out a space for himself by putting on this helmet and escaping into a different reality away from the war. So I'm really excited for people to watch them. And I'm so honored to actually be showing next to these 6 other artists. And hopefully it's also a sign to know that there are so many more Yemeni artists and creatives. And so I really encourage people to see through the multiple lenses and not just be defined, again, like I said, as villains and victims.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the films that you know have been put together by these 6 amazing artists, like you said, are just they're spectacular, they're high quality, they're amazing. And like you were mentioning, and like you had mentioned, like there's no villain or victim, right? It's Yemenis taking the narrative, taking the camera, taking the script into their own hands and choosing to tell their story as they see it, you know, obviously through like multiple lenses. So it's beautiful. And I know, like, as a film curator, I also get like, I'm also involved in conversations of like, oh, nothing's coming out of Yemen. But it's understandable because there's war. And it's like, no, there are things coming out of Yemen. There's beautiful art, there's film, there's so many things happening. But I think it's just lack of knowledge, lack of connection, lack of connections, lack of so many things. But it's really amazing that we're seeing still so many amazing things before the war, of course, but then also like where we're at now. You're seeing so many beautiful, amazing projects and pieces that are coming out that are telling the story of Yemenis. And it's so important, like you were saying, that, you know, that you brought these, that you know, these other films are accompanying this project and, you know, will be available for individuals to view afterwards, which I think is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's sort of this gaze. I would even say that this is why I think this event is so important. And, you know, there's this gaze in terms of like, well, including a Yemeni artist because they will have something to say about war, when really the point of this is to say there is so much more that we have to offer, you know, and to think about where it is that we come from. You know, when we talk about, everybody knows the Queen of Sheba, and yet she's really defined around this idea, and I should say Balqis, she's really defined around this main character, Solomon, right? And what their relationship was. But in fact, our ancestors carried one of the richest civilizations and strongest civilizations in the region. Balqis was never overturned during her time by the Phoenicians and the Romans. We traded in frankincense and myrrh. We have some of the oldest, we're the second oldest inhabited city, Sana'a, in the world. It's the same with some of the skyscrapers that are in Shibam, in Hadramaut, 1,700 years old. So if you ever walked into a skyscraper, well, the beginning ideas of it came from Yemen. If you had coffee, it's the same thing. So I think some of these, you know, we have so much more to offer. And I think these artists are really kind of drawing on that, on the fact that we come from power, and again, not from, you know, from war.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alia.
Of course.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, again, going back to like Yemeni futurism and Arab futurism in Yemeni. So like, can you talk a little bit more about like why specifically Yemeni futurism? And I don't know, I guess, I don't know. I'm curious a little bit more about the futurism thing, just because again, like we talked about this a little bit before, but why like Yemeni futurism? And do you ever weave that, or like, do you plan on weaving that with other parts of your identity, other forms of futurism that you had mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because I think really when it was, when I was thinking about it, which was in 2000, the summer of 2019, as I said, it was sort of brought up in these conversations. I was extremely moved by the writings of Octavia Butler, Sun Ra, but also some of ours, Larissa Sansour, for example, which you have featured. Her work is just absolutely incredible, and really approaches sort of Palestinian futurism in these, and really marks it as another plane of existence, almost refuting what has been set, how Palestinians have been sort of defined within the media and within, and breaking that gaze and creating something different. I think there are other artists, for even like from Morocco, Mariam Benani, Fatima Al-Qadiri, who, interestingly enough, here I'm talking about all women, you know, somehow, and I was really influenced by their work, as well as Afrofuturism. And then I started opening and seeing that there were these other marginalized communities and groups, like Indigenous futurism that's happening here in the United States, Sino-futurism. And then I started understanding that it really, unlike Italian futurism, for example, or maybe European-based futurisms, this was really different. It's about rejecting imposed futures that are defined by our occupiers and by people who have sort of placed us within their lens, will never exist in the way that other people have defined us. And so the only way is for us to sort of reclaim that identity and really define it for ourselves. Furthermore, in terms of thinking about Arab futurism, I mean, there's a lot about this, that there is a statement about saying Yemeni, because as Arabs, it's interesting, you know, all Arabs originated in Yemen from the 7 tribes. And I find it extremely ironic that right now Arabs are attacking us as well, you know, our brothers, right? Supposedly. And so I reject that almost as this identity to be shared with them. And because they don't even have the concept of the fact that it's actually like cannibalism, that they're eating themselves, you know, and where they came from. And so I turned that away and really put the focus on Yemen and think about how it is that we can start imagining new futures for our future generations, our nieces, our nephews, our children, and so that they're proud of it, so that they're not being, you know, reflected even in the media and in their schools and with their friends as a place, you know, of coming from war and being really defined by these traumatic stories, but rather remembering what it means to where they come from. And that brings me to the point of understanding that future, in order to create a future, we must absolutely draw from the past. And that comes in, this really, I mean, again, I became an artist through language, you know, by this critique of language. And that was how I accessed this film. And at one point when I was working on this film, I was listening, I thought, you know, if I'm going to create a language of the future, the language that only Yemenis can understand, you know, what would it be? And what would it encompass and what would it carry? And so, you know, obviously it would be Arabic and Hebrew, because we have a large diaspora and Jewish diaspora, and still who are living in Yemen, and many who are all over the world. And I wanted to include that as well. But even before that was Sabaean. And so I went onto YouTube and I started, you know, finding and listening to how it was. And I was so shocked because there was so much that I understand. If they're Yemenis listening, go and look for it. It's amazing. And so, and I started understanding so much of it. And I, you know, told my father, and my father listened to it, and we were both really shocked. And my friend Naama, who was with me, who went to my graduate school, there were parts of it that she could understood because it was written as Hebrew. And so inspired by these 3 languages, and also symbols, because I also look at textile and motif as another language, especially as Yemenis we're known also for our textiles and for our dresses and embroidery that define different tribes of where we come from, and symbols that define those tribes. Like our symbol, I'm from Qubayta, I'm a Qubatiya, and we have the Hanash, which is the snake, which means empowerment and patience. Whereas in the West, it's been sort of defined by these as this sort of vicious, you know, following under the story of Adam and Eve. And that shift is so important, though, you know, that you're not seen through evil, but you're seen through power, and it represents the feminine. And so really pulling all of these different, breaking this singular notion of that language can only be verbal and written, but actually breaking that into something that's much more expansive. And so in the installations, and as you see some of these markings that are in the film, they really take on the form of a mural. And so when people enter the exhibition or experience the film, it's this idea that if I can understand something from 3,000 years ago, then surely I can understand and create something 3,000 years from now in which Yemenis still exist. And so this is a letter from our ancestors from the future that we're reading right now. And this is a language that evolves, and being here at Roswell for this artist residency, which is amazing, I'm developing this language, and proud to say that now I can recognize and partially maybe try to read ancient Sabaean. And in that, it's amazing for this idea of a dead language, which people are considering a dead language, to try to reactivate it and think about it.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Alia. That's wonderful. I would love to, can we just make this program last like 5 hours so we can just continue like talking? I do want to be respectful of your time as an artist. And there are some questions that folks are dropping into the chat. I did want to, I guess maybe slowly close our session out before we start getting into some audience questions. And just if you could share with us a little bit about what you're working on now, and then how we can support you and the other filmmakers as viewers, as just folks in the world.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think let's first of all start with, I think, how to support, and particularly how to support the filmmakers. And I think, and also the extended, there are many, I mean, it's not only the people who are visible now and who are visible in this film series, but the extended. And I think thinking about how to include Yemeni artists, and I shouldn't even say that, really just artists who also carry this knowledge, not just because they're defined by their borders, but who carry this knowledge and this ancestral knowledge within us, but also within our upbringing, and that there's so much that we can offer in terms of creating, much more expansive dialogue and discussion. And I think, these films are a great way that can be included in many different ways. Share them, talk about them, get to know who these individuals are. Unfortunately, they couldn't be speaking with us here today because, of course, there's internet and connectivity. So we worked really hard at making their presence available. So when you look at the films, they did these recordings where they talk about themselves. And that's accessible also on Eventive. We're on Instagram, share the work. On my Instagram, I've listed all of their handles. So explore and do the labor. And I think, and really, I think to start thinking about different ways in which to look beyond the black and white, literally the newspaper pages, right? Find the color, and look beyond the main Google searches, which are violent. They are absolutely violent. I mean, that goes to say for a lot of our part of the world in West Asia, which is really, it's when going to Google, you sort of see that they're all the same Pantone and disaster and violence, but really there's so much more. And so put the extra word and put Yemeni culture, break it down, learn about it, visit, watch films, read. And when I say read, it doesn't only have to be about the war. It could also be about culture and history. And having said that, a lot of people still continue to tell me, oh yeah, I don't know about the war in Yemen and what it is. Well, I think that goes to the next point in terms of, for example, conflict. We also as artists do the labor. And a lot of the times this labor isn't shown and it's not recognized. So people are like, well, what does it mean? Just like show your film or show up, but pay the artists. I'm all the partners here are like, have respected all of us and in that regard, but also acknowledge the labor in terms of all the information. That's one of the reasons I made this conflict is more profitable than peace public. I wouldn't even say that it's much of an artwork. It is the appendix. It is as much information and there's more information to come out. And so now take the time to watch it, share it. And it's only the beginning. It only scratches the surface to also understand what is your complicity. What is our complicity as US taxpayers? Even Biden right now said, okay, well, we are going to pull out the military, support, but at the same time, great, but that's not a heroic act because where are the reparations since that you were a part of an administration that started this? So that's not enough. So I'm waiting to hear a little bit more about that. And these are certain things that these are lived experiences. And so for me, even in the privilege that I am of not being there and being here, to do whatever I can to be able to support that. And I think in terms of what I'm working on next, I'm really quite interested in different relationships and what does it mean kind of connecting, yes, of course, the military, also museum, also oil, and how this sort of industrial complex, this triangle, actually function together. I think that is interesting in terms of how in some hands, they are supporting the same people that they're destroying, and who's, so that's some research that I'm working on, and I'm working on this language, and yeah, and I continue to do my photography, and I think just follow, share, and yeah, I hope that helps. And I guess another way to also say it, I think it's really an opportune moment, is that I think if people are also thinking about helping or getting to know, I mean, this YWT is a really phenomenal organization, and I just wanted to share a bit about it, but I want to make sure to read so that I can honor their work. So it's a Yemeni civil organization, and it's based between Yemen and California. And like I mentioned earlier, it started by Nasser Al-Meng and is now collectively run with the brilliant Shaim Al-Tamimi. They're both artists and filmmakers. And so the focus of YWT is actually to enable youth to voice their issues by utilizing arts and culture, and through social media, just to promote human rights, peace, and different forms of democracy, democratic messages to a wider audience. So all of these they've also support these filmmakers and different artists with mentors and funds of what they can. So I encourage you to learn more about this organization as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alia. Yeah, I think you make excellent points. And I think we as an audience definitely have some homework to do, like you had said, like, reading, going beyond the Google searches, investing in knowledge, getting multiple pieces of the story as opposed to just like looking at what one unreliable news source says, going outside of the US for sources, for reliable sources, scholarly sources, supporting filmmakers, supporting amazing organizations like you were just mentioning, paying artists, right? I think so many of us are just like, oh, you just made art, give it to me for free. Like there's so much work and labor and time that goes into these art projects. So making sure that our artists are being paid and we're supporting artists in this way, I think this is all really important. So thank you very much for speaking to that.
Of course. And for example, something that, the Arab American National Museum, ArteEast, the Benton, I mean, there's this way also in terms of creating a platform, and it is such a complex, this is a very complex war, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's inaccessible. And I think that, if anything, there's a way, and this is one of the purpose of really, for me, that was really important, of including these other artists, cultural activators who made these films. And in order to think about, maybe if there's somebody outside listening, how can you continue to provide platforms so that we can actually define ourselves on our own terms, and particularly these artists who are based in Yemen, because we have the internet, and as we, there are other ways that you can work around it in terms of recorded talks ahead of time, and maybe featuring their film, writing. So, to learn more about them or to contact them, please feel free to contact myself or Nasser Al-Meng, and we can certainly put you in touch with them.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alia. I want to shift to a few questions that we have in the chat. And I think this will close out our event just for time's sake. So there was a question that I saw that came through when I think Conflict was screening the first short film. And I think I thought about this too when I was watching the film. The question is there a difference in the numbers between Democrats versus Republicans getting money here, right? Profiting from this circumstance. And then is it hard to know what we are to ascertain from this tiny picture, or from the tiny pictures?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. And I think for me, that's a great point. So in terms of the first part of the question, in terms of what those numbers are, I was actually really focused on so when you see the highlight, basically who are the people, everybody is getting money from these lobbyists, everyone. So in that regard, for example, Lockheed, almost everyone, I think possibly with the exception of Bernie Sanders, understandable, but like, everyone, and then the numbers sort of go down, and you see, but actually there are higher numbers. Ted Cruz has the highest number that are collected from these 5 particular ones. And I do realize that later on, this had kind of been brought up, like maybe I should name it, these individuals. And of course, as you'd mentioned, I think it was Kay Ryan was the name who had asked this. So I'm speaking directly to you. Hi. So thank you for that question. And I think that for me, it was more about, people who had gotten the money and sort of had been paid by these lobbyists there were also kind of this unanimous notion that on the Democrats, all Democrats had voted for the removal of arms, weapons. And as you can see, almost unanimously, but not entirely, the Republicans had voted to keep the weapons there. And that just goes to show is, whether Republican or Democrat, how even this country in the United States is sort of divided by this really binary, if we're talking, binary definitions of like red and blue and Republican and Democrat. And, but actually how that continues to be really aligned in law and in how these notions are, how these actions are being, introduced. It's not about what an individual might think, but it's what a party would think. And I think that's super dangerous. And yeah, so they are smaller, but hey, I encourage you to go and look it up. That is exactly what this film is about. And, as you can see, there's such a strong, with Mahjar, it took a long time because it's creating the soundscape, which can kind of exist separately. There's obviously the visual, giving time in terms of like, kind of the layering and the moving, whereas really conflict is more profitable than peace is something that, again, I mentioned is a really small snippet out of what is a much larger body of work and document of just compiling, and highlighting this information. So a part of that is also just for people to say, wow, why are these colors and what is this? Again, I did the labor and now I'm asking you to go. And if that really interests you, I think you really should.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alia. We have another question from Amanda, who asks, what is the simple yet most effective action a U.S. citizen could take to advocate for change? And then what is the most audacious? And there is another part, but I'll leave that part for a second part.
Again, I think that this is something, it's very difficult to say what people should do. There are lots of avenues in which you can, and I guess when you're thinking, I'm assuming that you're saying what a US citizen should do in regards to Yemen. I'm a US citizen. And just because I'm Yemeni, it doesn't mean, I still speak powerfully about, Palestine, about what was happening. I still continue, again, I guess I'm also Bosnian, but can still continue to try to keep alive this notion that like there was a genocide that happened in Europe only in 1990s. And I think to not be afraid, the simple answer is to not be afraid. And if it's something, I think fear of what people think about us or what people that we know, perhaps particularly maybe as women, that we must behave and we cannot share what we think, and it might, offend people, and it might offend, maybe family members or our jobs, or, but we have one life. And so I would really say that while something might feel like you're taking a risk, it's definitely not the risk that the people that you're speaking about are taking, and who not even taking, they have no choice. They exist in it. and they have no choice. And so, you know, if you see, and I think this really extends, I mean, if you see an injustice that is happening even within the United States, and I think there are so many of them, you know, my God, like when we're thinking about these horrible events that happen in Atlanta, I can't even, you know, and that just only, you know, that George Floyd is happening, you know, that all of this, and Breonna Taylor, like, right, we came up into a year, and the fact that we, you know, there are places in the United States we don't even have clean water, you know, and we still have concentration camps practically on the border. You know, certainly there are plenty of things within the United States, and excuse me, Amanda, I just realized I maybe assumed that you were from the United States, so I'm speaking from mine, only because the event is happening here. But I think there's so many things that happen within within the United States that it's hard to look beyond that, and yet we as citizens are very complicit about it. And I think there are ways in terms of contacting your senators, certainly. There are ways in looking up on how and understanding it, bringing it up, sharing things on social media, both of, you know, how to, I have a link, which actually, thank you for saying that, I'll post it today on my Instagram. And I have it in all my emails. There are different ways that are called Yemen Card, like CARRD. And these are different organizations. So if you just look up Yemen Card, but there's 2 R's, there are different organizations on there in terms of how to support people, you know, first of all, learn about it, understand it from very different perspectives, and then also how to support, whether it is through certain organizations that are like Save the Children, or Yemeni-led ones like Yemen Relief. And that's a really excellent one, and has been vetted, and they make packages of food and school supplies for children. And yeah, I hope that that's a good, yeah.
Great. That's wonderful, Alia. That's really helpful. And I think one thing that you mentioned, like you know, being passionate about all these different causes, like with Palestine and Black Lives Matter and you know, far beyond that, I think that's one of the things that I know, I won't speak for any other community, I'll speak for myself. I think that's one thing that I sometimes struggle with, is I'm very passionate about certain causes like Palestine and Black Lives Matter and others, and the war in Yemen, but sometimes I find myself not feeling a cause is very important, but not necessarily showing up in the same way for a different thing that's also horrible and happening. It needs to stop. And I think, I don't know if this is fair to say, but like, I really try to challenge myself at least to, you know, put in as much effort and emphasis and passion into fighting all forms of injustice versus just one that might be personally linked to me or something that I know more about. But I'm trying to constantly like challenge myself to invest in other causes that are just as important. And I think that's something that we all can do. And I think you alluded to that, right? Is like educating yourself and connecting with these organizations and artists. And, you know, a lot of the work is on us, but I think it's really important for us to do that without burning ourselves out, because it's very emotionally taxing, I'm sure. But I just wanted to throw that in as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there actually, because that's really important, because just as much of like you're using words about the word burnout, you also use the word invest, which is a very transactional, you know, it is a capitalist term because we immediately think about donating, right? So if we donate towards this, it absolutely does help, surely. At the same time, it's also about knowing what it is exactly that you're talking about, and acknowledging that even if it's not your experience, listening, hearing, observing, getting familiar, looking things up. At the same time, on the third one, and this is really, I think, a reflection of a lot of how I try to make work, is present beauty. Don't forget about the beauty. I think this actually is what keeps me going. You know, people ask me, okay, so you're an artist and an activist. Well, I don't know. I mean, an artist, yeah, because this was a choice. At the same time, it wasn't a choice, but it was a choice that I could make, right? And I'd made these. As an activist, of course, like, are we not? I guess it's like when somebody says, are you a feminist? And you're like, how's that a question? Of course are you not? Like, why are we? Of course we are. And I think, you know, that in that being able to, without having to show only violence, I guess is my point, because please understand that also within the communities, and for this, in this occasion, I would say that if you're sharing also news and information that has really traumatizing images, you are also triggering and re-traumatizing the people who are experiencing it. So be creative in terms of thinking like, what is something beautiful that I can share from Yemen so that people can understand what is at stake? And maybe in the writing, you can kind of say, you know, maybe not sharing, you know, sharing beautiful images, but also saying this is in the danger of like, is actively being erased by neighbors, by, you know, by countries all over the world. And how is it that we as individuals can stop that and also intervene by reminding people of the importance of this civilization, which is one of the oldest in the world.
Absolutely, well said. We are coming up to an hour for our talk, and I do again want to be respectful of your time and your voice and your energy. I'm going to ask a couple, I think there's 2 remaining questions, so I'm going to ask those really quickly, and I think we'll probably conclude. There's another question from Amatunur. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing. But they ask, I'm wondering if throughout your research you were able to come across information about non-West / Western-backed support of the conflict based, perhaps support of the other side.
The other side, meaning, I just want to understand. Can you do that question one more time, please?
Sure. And if the person who asked this question is still, if you want to maybe expand on what you meant by the other side, that'd be wonderful, but I'll repeat it. So I'm wondering if throughout your research, you were able to come across information about non-West / West, I'm wondering if throughout your research, you were able to come across information about non-US / Western backed support of the conflict, perhaps support of the other side.
So I think that this is interesting. Okay, I'm going to, there is no other side. And I think this is, you know, when we're saying the other side, we're only, to me, I'm reading that as that there are 2 sides, and there are not. This is something that is a war that is really actively being, you know, fought between this Saudi Arabia and Iran. And in the middle, there are pawns and there are people, and both of them are being backed by other countries, which are, yes, and to answer that point, yes, you have the United States, you have Serbia, you have China. This is again inside the film, you know, and then also we think about invisible, right? These are the ones that have been mentioned, but who are also the invisible backers who support that. We also don't only think about these sort of that are even within the Arab world. You know, right now we have the United Arab Emirates where there's a land grabbing that is happening of Socotra, you know, because people cannot defend themselves. And so literally land is being grabbed away. And this is not something that's being mediated. It's not being commented. It's just literally taken. And so when we talk about people who are so close to us, who in fact should be supporting us and helping us, people who are we're all descendants of the same place, are in fact, enacting a complete systematic erasure that is happening. And so much so that there's a blockade and there are famines. This is sort of like a new age form of war where let's block the country and just induce an entire a famine. So who gets stuck in between are Yemenis. And I think this is also quite dangerous in terms of saying, oh yeah, you know, there's the Republic versus the Houthis, and this is me speaking even to Yemenis, is that at the end of the day, everybody who's in Yemen is just trying to make a living. And I think this is really a beautiful point about all of these films that we're showing. You know, I think about Noor Adeen Morgan's film, you know, The Last Resort. You see this film and it's just, people are just trying to make a living. People are just trying to have their children brought up, be safe, try to get what medication that needs to be. And so at the moment, yes, Yemen has become a borderland of our own, you know, where people can't move and function and throughout it. And I think when we're talking about factions and what is the other side, perhaps all of this, these fireworks, as we're going to use, that are happening on the outside, at the end, we're forgetting about who is really at the core, not only physical bodies, but also when we think about even the looting, as we're here within an arts context, what's happening with all the arts, with all the objects that are really ancient, and the looting of these objects, where they're disappearing. Our archive is fragmented, but it's also being systematically erased. And this is something of which is really going to affect and influence the future generations. So thinking about where these archives are, but also where they're disappearing.
Great, thank you, Alia. And I did see in the chat that the person who asked the question did say the Houthi, for example. And I also should have said that they put the other side in quotation marks as well. So my apologies if that had hindered a response to the question.
I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Alia. And then lastly, and then Alia, I'll turn it over to you to kind of close us out. But I think this is a question you may have answered, but definitely I think worth repeating, if anything. Morgan asks, what would it take for more ordinary Americans to have a more nuanced view / understanding of Yemen?
I think I answered that. And I think to that point, I think even the fact that people are asking is really wonderful and exceptional. But I also think about people looking into themselves and finding, what is it that you're strong at? What is it that you're interested in? What is it that you're good at? Maybe utilizing that to kind of raise attention or raise awareness. If you are interested in food, well, go and learn and make Yemeni food, talk about it, share it, look into Yemeni music. There's even some incredible music that's coming out of, out of Yemen. There's Inti Bint. There's also people that are coming out of Jerusalem. There's Awa that are there. Awa's they're these three sisters who are remarkable, and they're of the Yemeni diaspora, and they really inherit, this idea of being fragmented from the land, but even within the nation state of Israel. And what does that mean that Yemeni Jews were actually really treated as third-class citizens, where at the beginning of the diaspora, the children were actually removed from their families and then put in with white families to sort of re-educate. And so there's also, Rabid Kahlani, Yemen Blues, they really are reactivating these old ancient songs, and they're singing in the old Jewish dialects, and they're absolutely exquisite. In fact, in the film, I use Ofra Hazzaz when we're talking about the anthems. There's there's the US anthem and there's the Yemeni anthem, and they both sort of get glitched out, and they're really reintroduced with these old songs. And it's by Ofra Hazzaz, who is a renowned Yemeni Israeli singer, and she's passed away, but she's an icon and a legend. And so I kind of use her voice as our anthem. So I think, learning about everything that we have, I wouldn't say to offer, but that we have brought rather, to where we are, where we are. And I think in that also all the things that I mentioned before, senators doing the labor, looking things up, looking for organizations and so on.
Beautiful. Worth repeating, worth mentioning all of those amazing artists. And like you said, you don't have to cram your head full of the politics of the situation, but your, music, food, talking to your senators. There's so many avenues that you can do that you don't have to spoon feed yourself knowledge you don't necessarily want or can't, but there are many other ways you can go about it. So thank you for bringing those all up. So Alia, I'm gonna let you close us out. Thank you so much again for taking time and making this beautiful work and bringing so many other amazing artists, that are also being presented with this program. So I will let you close us out.
Thank you so much, Dave. It was such an honor. Thank you so much for organizing this, and for such a really amazing talk. It's always amazing with you. Thank you. As I close this out, I would like to make some acknowledgments, and perhaps this is also, if Morgan, if you're still here, I do have maybe another idea. First, I'd like to make some acknowledgments. This has really been a mammoth of a project and absolutely would not have been possible without without all of the partners and specific individuals who have made this happen. Again, in terms of even trying to bring, how do we make as much of as a possibility to create a platform and try to utilize it in the best way that we can. I hope that there are more events like this, and I hope that other that other organizations can also see this as an example and do something similar. I'd like to acknowledge the Arab American National Museum, their staff and team, as well as the Benton Museum staff, Pomona College, especially the Department of Art History, ArteEast team, the Arab Film and Media Institute, YWT, Youth of the World Together, Rachel Keller, Dave Serio, Claire Nettleton, Justine Bay-Bias, Noor Tamari, Nasser Al-Mang, Shaim Al-Tamimi, Alaa Hafed, Victoria Sancho-Lopez, Rebecca McGrew, Hannah Grossman, the Roswell Artist in Residency Foundation, and of course the filmmakers Neshwan Sadeq, Alaa Hafed, Saber Wasel, Noor Adeen Morgan, Abdulrahman Alward, and Osama Khaled for your bravery, creativity, and commitment. Again, it's an honor. To close out this evening, I would like to say that many of you have asked what's next, and as I mentioned, the different ways that you can help. We also wanted to use this as an opportunity to announce something. I'm really honored and proud to announce that Youth of the World Together has invited me to partner with them in order to create the Alia Ali Fund for Yemeni Futurists. The aim of this scholarship, as we have been collaborating on and trying to put it together, is essentially to empower Yemeni artists and filmmakers to create radically imagined futures by providing resources such as financial, but also mentorship. So I will be mentoring these artists personally. We hope to create a space for powerful counter narratives and futures in contrast from the dystopic present that has been defined and imposed on us by occupying powers. So far, we have between YWT and myself personally contributed up to $9,000. And we would like to raise an additional $6,000, if not more, in order to provide 3 scholarships over the next 3 years of $5,000 each. You'll be able to learn more about this. There will be a follow-up survey that you will be receiving from the Arab American National Museum from this event. You've already signed up for it. So if you're here, if you're watching any of these films, then you've already signed up for it, and you will get a survey after this. And in that survey will be a link and more information about this fund. For more information, you can also follow my Instagram or the YWT Instagram. Mine is at studio.alia.ali, and YWT, it's accessible also online. I believe it's ywt.org. Thank you again for all of you who have made this possible, and all of you for making the time to join us this evening. And special thanks to all the tech team for just doing the magic and giving us this platform. It's an honor, and thank you.